Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Sarah Lang. I work at the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation. We are one of the 12 regional development corporations. We serve the Wyndham region. Today is one of our series, the Knowledge Bites webinars, and we are talking about the American Rescue Plan Act update. A huge topic of conversation in a lot of our communities, and we're excited to hear from the experts. Just as a little introduction, the program I run, the Southern Vermont Economy Project, it's funded by USDA Rural Development, and it's a capacity building program. So it provides webinars, small conferences, mini summits, technical assistance, and training to help advance your projects. You can see upcoming trainings and workshops at that website there, and I'll also just briefly touch on them at the end. Today we have Ms. Katie Buckley. She is with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. She will be giving us an update on the Arpa funding that is coming to all of our communities. And then also with us today, we have two of our Regional Planning Commission Executive Directors, Jim and Chris, and they're here to just answer any maybe more local or specific questions to our communities here in Southern Vermont. So I am going to stop sharing and hand it over to Katie. Take it away. Oh, make sure to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Thanks everybody for chiming in today. We're glad to have such a nice population out in Zoom land, a lot of familiar faces. I'm excited to be here with Jim and Chris and talk about ARPA funding. I will start screen sharing now. Let me know when y'all see it. We're good?
Looks good. And I forgot to mention, for questions, please go ahead and put those in the chat and we will be answering those. We'll spend most of this time probably answering your specific questions. So feel free to put them in the chat whenever they come to mind, and we'll address those at the end.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it. And I'm actually going to move quickly through the slide deck because I think it will be posted on BDC's website. We'll also post it on the League's website. And if it's okay with Sarah, I would also like to post the recording on our website for others to gain the benefit of it. And I think the most important part probably for all of you is the questions that you have that you might have already come with. So this is a pretty high level overview, but we can get more into the weeds with the questions. Great. So our goals for today, I'm going to cover the background of the ARPA funding. This is a Vermont specific presentation. I think I saw a Massachusetts person or two out there, so forgive me. This is a very Vermont centric presentation. The local allocation and payment schedule in Vermont, our timeline, what you can and cannot spend your ARPA funding on, a very high level overview of reporting, and the important role of your RPC as you start to think about spending your ARPA funding. So the American Rescue Plan Act passed in March of this year, $1.9 trillion stimulus package, perhaps one of the biggest in our nation's history. $350 billion is going out to eligible state, local, territorial, and tribe governments. The money is being distributed directly from U.S. Treasury to municipalities in Vermont. This is very unusual. It's the first time this has happened since the 80s when there was revenue sharing. So for municipalities, your money may have come through the state of Vermont, but that is the state of Vermont's only involvement in your money. They were just a financial intermediary and getting it from Treasury to you, but your funding is directly with Treasury and your agreement is directly with Treasury. All of the funding requirements are specified in a document called the Interim Final Rule. This is sort of the rules of the road for the legislation that was passed. It is interim. There were comments that were being accepted by Treasury until July 16th. We expect, hopefully, that we'll get a final rule by the end of 2021. There is no set date on that yet, but there are plenty of people waiting on that, including me. This is Vermont's share of the money that's coming through. State of Vermont is a little more than billion, excuse me. Counties were set to receive $121 million. Metro cities, which are Burlington and South Burlington, we only have 2, received a combined total of 20 million, and non-entitlement community units of local government were 58 million. That's all the rest, about 275 towns, cities, and villages throughout Vermont. The county money, as many of you likely know, there was some discussion on what would happen to that money. And thanks to our congressional delegation and our governor, that money is being redirected to all of the NEUs in the metro cities throughout Vermont. So hopefully this week you'll start to see your first payments in your communities of your county money. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. I'll go to the timeline slide. Payments to municipalities. So many of you would have already received your first, your community would have received its first payment around the week of August 9th. If you received a paper check, it would have followed within, US mail after that, 5 to 10 business days. The local money and the county money are following the same sort of payment schedule and timeline. First payment this summer for each, second payment around the same time next summer. Your timeline, all funds, all of your ARPA funding must be obligated by December 31st, 2024. That word obligated is a really important word. And all funds must be expended by December 31st, 2026. So what this means is that you need to commit all of your funding by December 31st, 2024. So you have all of this timeline to know how to plan to and spend your money. So needs to be decided by 2024, and then you have the 2 years following that to actually spend the dollars. Any funds that aren't spent, any funds that aren't obligated by the 2024 will need to be turned back to Treasury, and any that aren't expended by 2026 will be returned. So given all this timeline between now and December 31st, 2024, you have the time to be patient, be deliberate, and be strategic. This is a slide that we created at VLCT to help municipalities guide the road ahead for ARPA. So the first is prioritize good governance, involve all the right people, engage stakeholder outreach, and engage your residents, and follow all the rules. Read all the rules and follow all the rules around the funding. The second is leveraging your ARPA aid. In a lot of the projects that our communities are considering, there's other funding that's coming down the pike around water, wastewater, broadband, other federal funding, state funding, and programs that can be cobbled together to help you fund your project with more public money and less taxpayer money, if you're even considering that. All of those projects that you might have been thinking about but unable to launch due to funding, that could really change now given the environment that we're in. So leveraging, I call it other people's money. If you can use other people's money, do it. There's a lot of other people's money floating around out there right now. Invest in best uses for long-term recovery. Think about what the needs are for your community. Again, go back to that prioritization. What have you wanted to do for the long-term growth and sustainability of your town? Now might be the best time to do that and really use these dollars wisely as an investment in your town's future. And so when you take those 3 things together and you find the sweet spot right in the middle, that's your target. So here are the items that you can spend your money on. These are the 4 buckets that are in Treasury's interim final rule. So pandemic response, to respond to the public health emergency or its negative impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, or aid to impacted industries in tourism, travel, and hospitality. Premium pay for eligible workers. Those are the essential workers that were the frontline workers during the pandemic. You can provide premium pay to them, and there are rules around how you can do that. Lost revenue for the provision of government services. So the interim final rule contains a specific formula for calculating lost revenue on the local level. So you can't just look at your local budget and say, oh, we didn't have any lost revenue. you need to use Treasury's calculation. It includes a 4.1% revenue growth year over year for a certain 3-year period of time. Follow that calculation and you might just find that you have lost revenue. In fact, we think probably that most Vermont municipalities would. And then obviously infrastructure, that's water, sewer, and broadband. So to get it a little bit more weedy, and I can go through this, but I'm going to do high level what you can spend your money on. Pandemic response, so COVID mitigation and prevention, medical expenses, healthcare, addiction treatment, mental health services, public health and public safety employees, data design and execution of programs, health disparities, survivor benefits. And everything that's included in these slides is just a list that's not exhaustive. So it really pays to go through what your priorities are for the town and then see how and if they can fit into this funding structure of eligible uses. Economic impact, you can do grants and loans to impacted businesses and nonprofits, housing assistance, direct cash and loan interventions. Plus, if you're able to demonstrate that the population served is the low to moderate income population and those disproportionately impacted through COVID, then you can broaden the categories into which you could spend your money, which is childcare and education, housing and community development, infrastructure, and more. Premium pay, this defines what exactly those essential workers are. So this, I can go through all of them, but feel free to read the slide at a later point. In a lot of the smaller communities, it would be if you have fire and rescue and police, a lot of communities don't have paid departments. If you had a general store, you could give money to your general store. They were considered, their workers are essential workers during COVID. Childcare providers. So this is the list right here. Lost revenue, that's back to that calculation that I was just talking about a minute or two ago. So make sure that you use that formula. We do have it in the FAQ on the Vermont League of Cities. Whoops, sorry, tricky finger there. On the League's website, we have a dedicated ARPA page and a whole list of FAQs. And in one of the FAQs, it includes the formula for this. This link right down here, the revenue replacement calculator that was produced by the Government Finance Officers Association and is a tool that you could use to help you with your calculation. Obviously, water, sewer, and broadband. I'm not going to go into the detail on these slides because it gets a little bit weedy in terms of the rules around it. But as I said, the slide deck's available later for you to dig more deeply into those details. What you can't spend it on. This is a federal grant and it can't be used to match other federal funds. So if you were to bring other ARPA money in through the state of Vermont, one of the agencies, Agency of Natural Resources, if you had a water or sewer project, your ARPA money could not be used to match the state's ARPA money. You can't use it for pensions and infrastructure not directly addressed in ARPA. So if you wanted to do a paving project, you can't use your ARPA money for that specifically. Can't fund rainy day reserves, financial reserves, or pay down any outstanding debt. Things to consider, I have a lot of communities that say, oh, we're just not sure how to use our ARPA funding. I don't know if we have any eligible uses in our community to spend it on. Talk to your neighbors, see what they're thinking of doing, and you have the ability to pool your funds. So while you might not need a childcare center dedicated to your community, 3 or 4 communities together, if they're all thinking about childcare as a priority, you could pool your money together to develop a childcare center so that you could have the scale needed to support it and sustain it. You can transfer your funds. You can transfer your funds to another municipality. You can transfer them to a nonprofit, to a public benefit corporation, or there's one more, but you can transfer your funds. That's allowed through the interim final rule. You have time to be patient and think bigger. Those projects that you've been contemplating, if you're considering doing a water system and it's at this scale, maybe you'll make it bigger and plan for future growth in that. So I'm really encouraging municipalities to go through the blue sky exercise, right? What do you want to do in your community, and make a running list, create a running list of things that, some of them might fit into ARPA funding, but others might not be a great fit, but there is other funding that's coming out right now, and you could use that funding for it. So right now, creating your priority list in your community of what you want to do and where you want to go is the first best step that you can do. And it will drive how you spend your ARPA money, and it will drive how you make decisions going forward, especially as more money comes down the pipe from the federal government. Reporting requirements. I feel pretty confident in saying I don't have Burlington and South Burlington on this call today, and that you're all considered non-entitlement units of government, NEUs, and the reporting requirements for NEUs is once a year, every year by October 31st. Your reporting will be directly to Treasury. It does not go through the state of Vermont. Again, your funding is directly with Treasury, and they have created an online portal for reporting. They have released a 53-page document. It's available on our website and obviously on Treasury's website. That steps you through the portal. It does not contain the link, so you can't actually go in there and check out the portal yet, but you can check out all the guidance around the portal. And all of that is posted on our website. So thanks to the Vermont legislature and our governor's office, they created a ARPA assistance and coordination program. It is me through the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. It is my partners in all of the RPCs throughout the state, the 11 RPCs, and we provide guidance and project eligibility analysis webinars. Like today, we either host them or we participate in them and provide technical assistance, best practices, in person, Zoom, however it needs to take place. We're happy to accommodate. We have a dedicated email address at arpa@vlct.org, also my email. We offer guidance and compliance, reporting, transparency, and a lot of great information on a up-to-the-minute updated ARPA webpage on our website. Again, I could not be doing this work without the regional planning commissions. They are connected to each and every one of you in a way that I can't be. They know the issues on the ground in each of your towns. They hear all the conversations that are taking place, and they know all the resources. So they are an amazing resource for any and all communities, and who I most often refer to. So please, if involve them in your thinking and planning process, that's their services to you are invaluable. And that's me, that's Chris, and that's Jim, and that's my slide deck. So at this point, I would be delighted to, I can stop sharing my screen. I don't know if we'll need to refer to any of the slides, but happy to do Q&A.
Great, thank you, Katie. So we've only had one question put in the chat, but please feel free as they come to mind for people to type those into the chat. The first question is from Patty. Patty's in Londonderry. She's asking if housing availability has been indirectly impacted by COVID, for instance, flight to rural areas from cities, can funds be used to build or rehab housing?
Yes. They can be. They need to be used in such a way that obviously there's benefit for those impacted by COVID, right? So you can't use your funds to directly build market rate housing. You can't do that. But you could use your funds to, I'll give an example, one that I was talking about with a community the other day. You could identify perhaps in your community folks who are seniors, who are living in their homes and on fixed income and income sensitive, where they're struggling to maintain their homes and they have plenty of space. They could create an ADU in their house, which would help them stay in their home, allow them to age in place, and allow a housing unit to be created through the process. So you could target a population of senior homeowners and do a program like that. That's just one example, but worthy of talking more about it. You could start planning around changing your zoning regs if you haven't already done that to accommodate more affordable housing in your communities. And you can work with your RPCs to discuss ways to do that. You could use your funds for planning.
Jim and then Chris. Oh,
Muted, Jim.
you're still muted, Jim.
I clicked the wrong button. Okay. I just have a complicated question for you. You get onto some of these others that are more focused probably, but so one of the things that you can do, as you mentioned, is municipality could transfer the money to nonprofit, say for some eligible activity. So I'm wondering if there's a nonprofit in a village area that is developing a facility, say, that could benefit from a new wastewater disposal system, and there's enough money available for it to be, sized to be like a small community wastewater system. Could the municipality, contribute that money to the nonprofit to develop a community wastewater system, and then the nonprofit could in turn allocate capacity to support private development around it?
Yes. And that's the base level for affordable housing, Jim, right?
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I'm thinking. That's a way to use infrastructure to support a lot of community goals, but in a town that's, not big enough to have its own sewer system or
Yep.
to handle a wastewater system.
Chris, you have a hand up there.
Chris.
Yeah, I'm putting in chat, again, using other people's money. ACCD has special funding available for a grant program for bylaw modernization, specifically to support housing development. And so I just put that in the chat for communities that need to revisit what their bylaws say about more housing. And just one other quick note about housing. The situation in Southern Vermont, really statewide, and in some cases, New England wide, that may be an opportunity to partner up with another town. Like in some towns, it may make sense to really have a housing focus, but if you're a particularly rural town, maybe it makes sense to partner up with another town. And whether and I know we're still waiting on a lot of details about exactly how the funding can be used, but when it comes to infrastructure like water and wastewater, to really develop significant amounts of housing and the types of housing that's needed, we're going to need those wastewater and water investments. And it may actually make sense in some cases to partner up with another neighboring community that maybe already has, just has land better suited, close to a village or downtown that's better suited to housing. So just, I would just encourage in some cases, the solution may lie beyond your own town boundary. It may lie in actually kind of a consortium approach among communities. So just wanted to throw that out there.
And I don't know who all the folks are that are participating today, but having municipal water and sewer, a lot of communities will identify affordable housing as a great need, but unless you have the infrastructure to support it, you can't actually develop it. So that's, the planning, the preparation, and the infrastructure is all what needs to occur before you'll ever, we'll just get a developer to come in. Not unless you have water and wastewater in place to do that and support the growth that needs to take place. And you can do that all in the right places with the right plan and then put it all together. But it's exactly as Jim and Chris are saying, that having, that's the base level. That's where I have to start. If you don't have it, you need to at least talk about it and address it and determine the need.
Gail put a question in the chat along this line. She says, wastewater is a major need in our community. Could we direct ARPA monies to this need? However, we are aware of other sources and hope that the major federal infrastructure bill will be passed would provide the funds we need for the system.
So there's local ARPA funds. There's state ARPA funds for water and wastewater. I want to say, and Jim and Chris, you might correct me, I want to say the state got 150 million for water and wastewater through ARPA. Is that correct? It's at least 100. It's at least 100.
I don't remember the exact number, but it's substantial. So now we're waiting to see again, kind of like on the everybody's waiting to see exactly how the funding can be used. And so
Right.
So I think the state's waiting for that. Then I'm sure that we as RPCs and Katie and VLCT will all be pushing out information about the different state programs as those details become better known. But you're right, there may be funding
To the infrastructure bill.
Yeah, but remember, I mean, the other one of the questions on the infrastructure bill, yeah, I'm sure that it's going to be traditional, water and wastewater. But one thing, I haven't looked at the federal infrastructure bill, but I'm also wondering, to the extent that ARPA is pushing hard on water and wastewater, will they be looking at that bill as a major source of water and wastewater funds? So it's you got plenty of time to figure this out right now. Use this time to try to think through and prioritize what your needs are, and then you'll be ready to pull the trigger when you see what's available.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that too, because I think a lot of folks look at the local and county money that their municipality is going to get, and they'll say, yeah, we have a need for say, a significant wastewater project, but that's only half the amount we need, and we just can't come up with another $1 million. So they immediately run and look for other things to spend it on. But there are those other funds. So if that really is a priority, and you can pay attention to those additional funds that may be able to supplement the ARPA funds, it's worth waiting to see what's available before you get too far down the road going in a different direction.
Someone commented, sounds like you're recommending larger wastewater systems rather than smaller community systems.
I think generally speaking, we're talking soil-based systems. So, in the future, systems may be like individual septic with shared gray water, and it may be more how those systems are managed, as opposed to like a conventional plant like you might have in Brattleboro, Bellas Falls, Wilmington, Dover, elsewhere.
It really depends upon the community, right?
Yeah, it does. And we talk about these, smaller community systems, but, smaller community systems can be pretty expensive too. Like Shaftesbury did a feasibility study a few years back, and I think it was, $2.5 to $3 million for, a soil-based community wastewater system for South Shaftesbury Village. So that's just always been too much for them to bite off. So yeah, we're not talking about, a big treatment plant with aeration lagoons and all that kind of stuff, but they're still expensive projects.
But this funding is the difference between Shaftesbury's plans sitting on the shelf and maybe now happening, correct?
Yeah, I mean, and apologies if anybody from Shaftesbury is on the line, but one of my first meetings working in town planning in Vermont, I was sitting in the Shaftesbury Planning Commission meeting in 1988, and they were talking about the need for some type of wastewater system in South Shaftesbury Village. And they've been talking about it with every town plan update ever since that I've been involved in. And they're just, the resources have never been there. So, this is certainly more than they've ever had. I don't know what Shaftesbury is going to use their money on, but this is one of those, once in a century opportunities to finally address those needs.
Great, thank you. Olivia asked, we are a small rural electric company. Can we spend the money for line maintenance purposes, specifically tree trimming of potentially dangerous impacting limbs on lines, poles that we own?
That's a good one. So is that a sort of considered a village that received funding?
I believe it's Jacksonville.
Okay. I would need to dig into that. And it might be that you claim lost revenue and use it for that. And also for anyone that has an inquiry, feel free to connect with me offline after this, and I can do more research, dig deeper, and provide you with a better answer. I don't have it today.
It's arpa@vlct.org.
Yep, or Kate
Great.
Buckley at VLCT, either
Great.
or. Thank you.
Olivia, why don't you take that email that I just put in there and send Katie some more details, and she can definitely look into that for you.
Thank you.
Something that I've heard, it's not come up in the chat yet, but I'm curious, Katie, what your experience is talking with a bunch of different communities over the past couple of months. Is this idea of public engagement? What is your experience, or what do you feel, I guess, what are towns required to do as far as public engagement? And then also, if it's not required, what are you suggesting to towns? Like, how should the public get involved? How can they get involved? What's sort of your gold star when it comes to public engagement?
Sure. So I'm just going to sort of dial it back to talking a little bit about the funding. For anybody who's used grant funding before, typically what you do is you identify your project, you figure out how you're going to pay for it. Usually it involves a grant or many, and you draft competitive grant applications, you go into funding rounds, you cross your fingers and hope you get funded. And usually those grant applications have a component of a public hearing to them where you have to hold a meeting in public to discuss the funding and the project. And if all things go well, your grants get awarded and you are able to put a shovel in the ground. And at that point, by the time the shovel hits the ground, your community is probably saying, oh, it is about time. It's been forever getting this project to go. Your ARPA funding is the exact opposite of that. So you're getting this grant from the federal government saying, here's some money. Here are the 4 buckets in which you can spend that money. Go forth and spend. And so that, for anybody in the world of grants, is unheard of. That you're just given money without a specific project, without rules around it for involving your public. So it's viewed, in my opinion, as discretionary money in many ways. And so putting it out there in the public realm and asking your community members to join the conversation is a really good idea. Is having a public meeting and public engagement a requirement of the funding? It is not a requirement of the funding. Is it a really good idea to do it? Absolutely. Absolutely. If you read the interim final rule, if anybody wants to do that, don't do it at night and have it on your bedside table because you'll go to sleep probably instantly. But it all throughout the interim final rule is mention of the public, engaging the public, involving the public benefit, all of that. So inviting the public in to be part of how you spend the money is really important. Hosting an event, and there's a gold standard of public engagement would be hosting a series of events on different dates and times so that everybody can participate, having a Zoom component to it so that it invites more people in. It could involve surveys. It could involve a big, roll of paper, posted up at your general store, asking residents, if you're a, resident of town X, what do you think we should spend our ARPA money on? Here are the 4 buckets. There's thousands of ways to engage your public, but allowing them to have a voice in the process is really important. You can work with your regional planning commission. They are excellent at working with the public and facilitating public discussions. For a lot of towns, having someone else host the meeting so that you don't have to be front and center as the select board or the alderman or whoever you are in your community being the leaders. There are a lot of prickly public meetings, and sometimes having another person facilitate it and run the meeting allows you to sit back and be a community member and a voter. And having that sort of third neutral party facilitate it helps to guarantee a better, less prickly conversation that sometimes comes up. So is it a requirement? It isn't. Is it probably the best idea to do it? It is. And you'll see, I'm sure, throughout Vermont, for those communities who aren't yet hosting public engagement meetings, you'll probably start to see community members asking to be heard. So they might be asking to be put on the select board meeting agenda, asking for more information about how they can learn more. So gather all that information and keep track of it. So.
Great, that was, yeah, that was sort of leading into my next question was, if you are a resident of a community and you haven't heard from your town yet on if they want your input or not, what are some suggestions of how that resident can bring it up to the select board or the town manager? Like, what are some ways to start the conversation?
Sure. You can always ask in small towns that don't necessarily have paid staff. If it's just a select board, you can ask the select board chair to be added to the agenda and come prepared to discuss, answering the question, is there a public engagement component to this and how can folks be heard?
Mm-hmm. Great. What other questions do people have? There hasn't been any new questions added to the chat, but if nothing comes to mind, you can obviously always reach out to Katie. Jim, go ahead.
I'm not sure the extent to which it's been addressed, but the guidance on eligible activities makes mention in a clause of stormwater management projects, and a lot of our towns that don't have water sewer systems are interested in that as a potential opportunity, either possibly in conjunction with some of the other state programs that are available. But the stormwater question has come up a lot.
It has come up a lot to me as well, and I don't have a great answer for that yet. I'm hoping I can lean onto A&R to help me answer that question a little bit better. Because when you read the guidance in the interim final rule, it talks about stormwater as it relates to water and wastewater projects. But to me, all of that relates to clean water. So I don't want to make a huge assumption, and I want that assumption confirmed at a power greater than me before I start. And you can feel free to help me out there, but that's my, I don't.
No, I mean, I kind of read it the same way, Katie. When I read it, it kind of like, it sounds like somebody was writing this thinking about, stormwater management systems in cities with stormwater drains and pipes and everything else. But the question is, to accomplish the same thing in our rural communities, there's different types of stormwater systems. So,
well, someone said to me, Jim, I asked someone else about culvert replacements, and they said, well, does it have a nexus with clean water? And I said, doesn't every culvert have a nexus with clean water, right? Isn't that sort of the idea? So I think that's one of those things that's more to come as things get clarified, because it feels to me like all of the work around the municipal general permit, all of that work is all tied to clean water. So
Chris?
I welcome you two experts.
Once we know more about how it can be used, I mean, Katie and I met with a smaller community last week that really doesn't have, probably much of a need for, they would have very specific like wastewater needs, like for a community center and for the town office or that kind of thing. And for a daycare building that they actually own. So that's another way of like looking at wastewater, but it's also a community that has major stormwater issues. It's a valley community. It has a beaver dam that breaks not reliably, but every 10 or 15 years, and it takes out, a stretch of road, the main road through the valley. But to my mind, if they define it broad enough, depending on what your community is, you could be looking at everything from like conservation of river and stream buffers to try to hold the banks in your community where you've got a lot of erosion, trying to work with landowners on conservation easements on large stretches of rivers or streams. It could conceivably be like if you've got a ganged culvert, that is at serious risk of trapping debris and blowing out and then causing all kinds of water quality and erosion issues downstream. Maybe that would be qualifying, but that is another opportunity that folks should look at. And in my mind too, it kind of fits with climate resilience and adaptation. Down here in the southern part of the state, we're now looking at the third tropical system that'll hopefully just skirt by, but this will be kind of the third bullet we've dodged, since the July 29th and other events in July. So, stormwater is kind of on my mind right now. But there may be some real opportunities, and that's where, we as RPCs, we're not going to tell you the answer, but we can certainly help you think through what some opportunities might be and how it might pair with some other state grant programs.
Two sort of similar questions, sort of the more broad question is, what is the timeline for knowing what other funds and state ARPA funds might be available? And the specific one was asking basically that same question, but for wastewater.
Well, I don't have a great answer on that. I know that the state is working its way through ensuring that the programs they're trying to stand up, because this will be a new program for a lot of state agencies, depending upon what their buckets of money that they receive. Standing up a new program takes a lot of thoughtful time and energy. It'll be grant programs, a competitive grant program. So they also need to ensure that whatever they're standing up complies with all the rules around ARPA. So they're making sure that all the language that they draft is then vetted through a consultant to ensure that they're not violating anything in Treasury's interim final rule, because the state of Vermont, just like all of the municipalities, follows the exact same rule. So they need to follow, typically they might run it on the back of an existing program, but if the existing program doesn't have rules that mesh with Treasury's interim final rule, then they actually have to adapt that or create a whole new program. So it's quite a beast, actually. And I don't know exactly when the state's timeline is. I know they're in the thick of it. I would imagine, hopefully, don't quote me, but hopefully by the end of 2021, we'll know. I'm hoping to host a webinar with state partners to talk about funding opportunities in mid-October. We're looking at, I think, October 13th. We'll have that date on our website to host a webinar with agency heads and the buckets. They'll discuss their buckets of funding, very high level. But you should see more in the next month or so about that, with real nitty gritty boots on the ground programs hitting. I don't know. I'm going to guess by year end. They too have a clock ticking. So all that money, they need to commit it by December 31st, 2024, and they have to have it out the door by December 31st, 2026. So just like all the rest of municipalities, the state has a clock ticking, unlike never before. So I think they're working as fast as they can, and That's a guess. I don't have real information though on that.
Great. So two other questions that I kind of would pair together. One is, what are some of the more creative ways municipalities are talking about using the funding or unique ideas to problem solve within the guidelines? And then added on to that, is there a place where towns can share processes and project ideas to inspire?
That's a great question. And hi, Jake. Thanks for asking that. We don't have anything yet. Hello, good to see you. We've discussed the idea, RPC's VLCT and the state, about creating a dashboard for projects. But that will be projects after they're already decided, right? And from a reporting and transparency perspective. But the brainstorming around ideas, I don't know yet. And I don't know if Jim and Chris have any input in their corners of the world, if they've had any communities starting to bubble forth ideas. I mean, most of my conversation and work to date have been not so much, here's what we'd like to spend our money on, more like, what can we spend it on? Like, so the real creative part, I feel like we're a little ahead of that right now. I think it's coming, but it would be great to have some sort of place where idea sharing could be posted to spark ideas, because I don't know anybody else out there. Looking at what my peers do helps me think about things differently, either expand on them or redirect ideas. So having that creative brainstorming location, I welcome suggestions for how to do that.
Chris?
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, and something that I just write a note that we should do at at our regional commission. I think at the very least we can, we're talking to towns, and as we're hearing and people are developing ideas, we can create that kind of thing, at least regionally.
And Jim, not to put Sarah on the spot, but that might be something that actually the Southern Vermont economic zone might be able to host.
Yeah.
That way we have more of a Southern Vermont approach to it, as opposed to just kind of bifurcating it with the regions. The other thing I was just going to say, Jake, is I think sometimes we're beginning to have those conversations, but then the flooding we had here kind of put a pause on that for a little bit.
I want to note Jake is wearing his So Vermont hat, so just repping that. Appreciate it.
Nice.
What other questions? I think that I've heard a lot in sort of conversations around the state about, how can we hear what other towns are doing, that might spark ideas. And I think, I think having sort of a Southern Vermont landing place for all those could be a good idea. Just an easy kind of constantly updated list as we hear of things could be really easy to put together.
And it's, I've had a lot of people ask me, well, what are you hearing throughout the country? The other states and places in the country, what are they doing? And the hard part for me in looking out there to what the ideas are, what's being shared on the internet, which obviously is where I'm going for my information, are larger cities. That it's not necessarily relatable to Vermont scale and what we face here. So I feel like we're going to have to do what we do best in Vermont, and that's really be creative and strategic and thoughtful in how we're going to use this really, I'm going to use the word once in a lifetime, because it really is that communities have this punch of money that they have never had before. And so how are we going to use it here? How are we going to use it to make a difference in Vermont and in our Vermont communities? I think we're going to have to do a lot of forging our own path and being leaders for the rest of rural America. I can just see already in our Arpa assistance and coordination program and working with my state peers, we're not doing it like anybody else. And so they're starting to lean in a bit on Vermont and saying, what do you got? Like, where are you getting all this information? It's like, well, we have dedicated resources to this so that we can support our communities. We were the one of the earliest states to get everybody certified. You hear about other states and they're struggling to get their towns to certify. We're done in Vermont and the money's flowing. And so that's special and unique, just in how we do everything. So us having our own location to share ideas, and if you get a regional one for Southern Vermont and it is working, then let's figure out how to replicate that through the rest of Vermont and then give exposure to each of them so people can have the whole state, look at the whole state to get connected. Because while you might not have a lot in common with another community, the project that you want to do might have a lot of commonality and where you can learn from that, and it might be in a different.
Yeah, and that could also potentially spark, if it's another town in your region, that could also spark some collaborative efforts. Like, oh, you're thinking about that too? Great. Like I didn't know until I saw this. So let's talk how we can pool money. Can money be used for flood resiliency measures and mitigation?
That's what we were just talking about. What Chris was talking about.
Chris was talking about.
Yeah, great. Stormwater.
Great. Should we consider having a Twitter account for Stowe Vermont Ideas? I'll say I have never been on Twitter and don't have Twitter myself. So maybe I'm a little behind the times, but yeah, I think, Gail, that whether it's Twitter or something else that's interactive and engaging, I think definitely open to ideas of how to create something that's most useful.
Maybe a TikTok account so that way we can see Jim dance.
Probably don't want to see that.
Awesome. Anything else? We are at 12:55, so I just want to be mindful of people's time. And again, Katie is responsive and available as is Jim and Chris. So if there were specific thoughts or questions you had that come up after this, reach out directly and they're happy to answer.
I'll just share an observation regarding how other places are using ARPA funding is just my friends and contacts elsewhere in the country. A lot of the focus immediately goes to water and wastewater infrastructure because a lot of communities have already invested in that. For whatever reason, Vermont, New England generally just ties itself up in knots over investing in basic infrastructure needs. And I'm sure there are good cultural and political and other reasons for that. But in other parts of the country, it's just kind of a no-brainer. But the other problem with a no-brainer in some of the other parts of the country is it's contributing to sprawl. But, virtually every town plan that's out there, and certainly the regional plans, are focused on creating compact settlement. And frankly, you're not going to create, just like you're not going to develop substantial housing without wastewater and water, you're not going to develop compact settlement without wastewater and water either. They're both the two sides of the same coin.
No local brewery.
Our challenge is to do it smart as opposed to investing in it to where you're facilitating housing hither and yon that's going to just further complicate the provision of services, public costs, and a lot of other things. So,
Katie, any final words to send us off with?
My words are thank you to any folks out there who are part of your municipal government. Thank you for taking the brave leap to accept federal funds when you maybe haven't worked with them before, and all of the work that goes along with that for the betterment of your community. It's a big leap. And the smaller the town, the bigger the leap it is because the requirements for reporting are all the same. But it's a moment to do exciting work. And a lot of it's foundational, as Jim and Chris talked about with water and wastewater. I know we keep going back to that, But without that critical piece of infrastructure, you're not going to have the growth in your community. And I don't mean big, sprawling, massive growth, just housing. If you wanted, I just mentioned a brewery, if you wanted a microbrew to be in your town, can't have that either, not without water and sewer. So they're critical pieces of infrastructure that if you had ever contemplated them, no matter the scale, doesn't have to be large, even small, to start thinking in that way, now's the time to do it. There's money to do it. And even if you can only get your plan a certain point of the way, it's better than no plan at all and ignoring it altogether. So don't be hindered by ideas, get them all out there. Prioritize what your community wants, especially if they've had input on it, they'll help steer you. And for the younger folks, that's your future leadership who are going to be taking the reins from you someday. So work together and go forth and do great things in your community.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. And I'll be sure to follow up with everyone with Katie's presentation, as well as a link to the recording, as well as contact information for Katie and Jim and Chris. So thank you everyone for taking some time to join us today. And I'm really excited to see what comes of all this influx of cash. It'll be really exciting to see. Thanks, everyone.